Thank you all for joining us for the Strategies for Surviving the Thesis and Dissertation Process from recent graduates. So joining us today are John Oluwepo, who got his PhD in 2020 in public health, Joy McKenna, who got her PhD in 2020 in biological sciences, Denise Cook got her PhD in sociology in 2017, and Jeff Eggleston got his PhD in kinesiology and nutrition sciences in 2018. So they are going to be answering your questions about how to survive your thesis and dissertation process. I'm going to hand it over to them for introductions, and then we will begin taking questions. So John, would you like to start us off?
Hi, hello everyone. My name is John. I finished my PhD from public health in May of this year, during the pandemic. So it's been a tough one. So I mean, I'm here to share tips and answer questions that anyone has to answer. I currently work as an assistant clinical professor at Northeastern University in Boston.
Thank you, John. Jeff?
Hi, Jeff Eggleston, currently an assistant professor of kinesiology at the University of Texas, El Paso. Also director of a laboratory here doing kinesiology-based research. Happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you. Denise?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Denise Cook. I earned my PhD in the Department of Sociology in 2017. My research was an examination of the performance of voluntarism as well as how individuals performed work. And I currently live in the DC area, and I work as a survey statistician for the federal government.
Thanks. And Joy?
Hi, thank you for having me. I got my PhD in microbiology in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic as well. Currently, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford School of Medicine. I'm in the microbiology and immunology department, and my research has focused on how bacterial pathogens infects the host and the crosstalk between that. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you all so much. So while our students are thinking of questions, I will start us off and ask, what did you most struggle with while writing the thesis or dissertation? If you wrote both, perhaps talk about the struggle, how the struggles were similar or different. And whoever would like to start us off.
I guess I can go ahead and kick this off unless anyone else wants to start. One thing I noticed, so I did a master's thesis and a dissertation. One thing that I noticed is that doing the dissertation was actually easier. And that may sound counterintuitive, but it's because I actually kind of knew what I was doing with a dissertation. For my master's thesis, I was clueless. So the biggest struggle I had was actually putting words onto the document and making them coherent. With the dissertation, I kind of knew what I was up against. And I didn't do the traditional big project dissertation, but more about multiple studies. So, my papers were already written, they were published by the time I did my dissertation, and then it was really just kind of building in those chapters. But for my master's thesis, it started out as a train wreck, and we barely survived, but we did.
Sure, I'll jump in. And I have a very similar experience. I also wrote a thesis at UNLV for my master's and then my dissertation. However, I would say that when I started my master's, when I first entered into the program, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with life. And I wrote my master's going on that track, and then I changed my mind completely after that. So, be flexible with yourself when it comes to writing a master's thesis and then going into a dissertation. You may certainly have a similar topic that you're interested in exploring in both of those documents. However, if you have a change of heart or another interest that arises, don't hesitate to explore those additional interests. And one other thing that I strongly recommend during the phase between your thesis and your dissertation, if you're doing both at the same university, consider taking classes in other departments other than just your department, because you actually may be able to broaden your horizons and create a more well-rounded document when you're writing your dissertation that you may write otherwise, just staying only within your department. And only within that first thing that you decided you wanted to study.
Yeah, so for me, I think when thinking about what I struggle with most, I think I agree with Jeff. I knew what I wanted to do. It was clear, but of course, somehow we tend to under budget on the time commitment that it will require to actually write. So for me, that was my major challenge, right? So one or two times I would tell my advisor, oh, I'll send you chapter 3 by December 30th. And December 30th comes by and goes past, and chapter 2 is not yet done. So that was really what I struggled with. Otherwise, I think I knew what I wanted to do, and I got it done. But that balancing time was really one of the biggest challenges, especially when it comes to writing, putting the words down on paper. It's a different thing to have it in your head, but it's a different thing to actually write it down in a coherent fashion.
All right, it looks like we have another question in the chat. It says, I'm wondering how to balance family and work. If you're married and have children, please share how you have balanced these roles with your role as a PhD student.
Yeah, so I think I'll take that. As a student, I was a student. I was married. I had 2 children, then 6 and 5, so 6 and 4. So it was tough, but I think if you and your partner have agreed to go down this path, I think it's an ongoing discussion about the amount of time that you will need to put into to complete the task. So my partner, my wife, was really very understanding. A lot of times I would just stay in the room, lock the door, and let her and the children find a way to sort themselves out, right? But I know that whenever I finish whatever I was doing, I had to spend time with the children and spend time with my wife too. So I think it still goes back to balancing your time. But one thing I never did, or one thing I made sure I did always, was to make sure that there was a clear line of communication. She always knew what I was doing, right? So she knew when not to disturb me. And she tried to help me communicate that with the children too, right? There are times that, okay, it's like maximum busy. I don't want to be disturbed. But there are times that if I'm doing a meeting, that I can leave the door open and the children can always walk in and walk out, informal meetings. So you just need to be clear about how this is going to work out. And I was lucky, I was able to finish in 3 years. So I think it was clear communication and that understanding with your partner that this is what we need to do, this is what we've set out to do. I need your support to get it done, right, as soon as possible.
And so I'm a mom with 3 kids. I actually had, when I first started my doctoral program, I had 4-year-old twins and a 2-year-old. And so I know it was crazy. But it was, I'll be honest, I mean, it was doable, but it was a challenge because As a mom, you want to interact with your children. I don't know about other moms, but I had a lot of mom guilt associated with not being able to be there every minute, not being able to make them lunch or breakfast or tuck them in at night because I was studying or I was in class. And so one of the big things that really helped me through the process is that my partner was very forgiving in terms of understanding that my time was focused on my education, understanding that bedtime might be his for 5 nights in a row, and I might get one night, and then he's back on bedtime, lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And so if you don't have a partner, that's okay too. It's just you have to have a strong support system in terms of somebody you can communicate with who will support you with the kids. Because if you are studying for your comprehensive exams, for example, it's pretty challenging to interact with kids and do that full time and actually feel confident enough to walk into that exam room knowing that you're going to pass with flying colors. Same thing with writing your dissertation or thesis. And so having a strong support system, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's a partner, even faculty, understanding that not all faculty have shared the parenting role and even the partnership role, knowing that you might want to identify faculty that might be more understanding to your circumstance will also assist you, because when you say, I can't, my child is at home sick, you want somebody who can actually empathize with you, or at least understand, even if they've never had those experiences. So just, have that clear communication with your family and or support systems, as well as your faculty that sit on your committee and or who may mentor you through the program.
I think that Denise brings up a really good point about having an understanding mentor. My mentor doesn't have kids, never did, never understood that position. But I was very upfront with her in that I have kids and they are coming along too, right? We're sort of all in this together. And, there were times when I would tell her that, I would like to get this to you by this day, but it's going to have to wait. Or the email is going to come at 1 in the morning when everyone is sleeping. Like those are things that you have to do. But it kind of goes back to what John said earlier, is that you just have to communicate. Whatever it is, whether it's partner, support system, mentor, even your colleagues, right? Your friends that are GAs. You just have to communicate those things because it's not easy. I don't know about the rest of our panelists, but I was dad from 4 to 8, and then from 8 to 1 or 2 in the morning, it was writing, and then we're back up at 6 doing it again, and we just magically are grumpier and grumpier as time goes on.
Did you want to add anything, Joy?
No, I can't comment. I don't have children.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you all for your advice. So for our next question, can you all speak a little bit about what you learned from this process?
So I think one of the things that I learned the most, going back to my master's, was that I am very, very good at procrastinating, which can be a skill, but it can also be a kryptonite. And knowing that going into my PhD made it better. I was able to kind of utilize that, and I forced myself to be more organized. In my master's thesis, again, I said it was a train wreck, and it really was. I limped across the finish line. We made it, but it was not pretty. Don't do what I did if you're in the master's realm. But I learned to kind of structure things so that I had my built-in time that was just me, or that was family time. Kind of giving myself that mental break, because after a while you put the same words on the page and you're like, I said the same thing 9 times. This is fantastic. So for me it was knowing who I am and knowing that there are things about me that I can't change, and procrastinating is one of those. Still to this day, I feel like I'm a great procrastinator. Um, and you just have to know where you lie in those things and sort of how you can make yourself better.
Yeah, to comment briefly, right? So I doubt if there will be anyone that finished PhD and would, or even their masters to an extent, and would not have learned those critical skills of time management, right? Like Jeff said, I mean, by the time I was done, right, I had become so good at, not, you can't perfect time management, right? But I'd become good, but I'd also become very good at procrastinating. And you know that there is this funny chart that you know what is urgent, what is important, what can wait, you know. You just, whenever you get an email or a task comes your way, you just automatically put it in a box, right? And know that, oh, this can wait, it's, or I mean, this is something someone else can do. Especially if you are lucky, you have GAs or any of the undergrad students working in your lab, you can just tell someone else to do it for you, you know. But automatically, whenever I receive an email, it's like it goes into one of those boxes, and I know that. But one thing I really did was, I'm a bit old school, so I had a manual diary. I never kept an electronic diary, but in that manual diary, whenever I procrastinated on something, I actually wrote it down, right? And told myself on this date. So if someone sends me an email and said there will be a meeting, we need your feedback by February 1. So I put in my diary and say by January 26th, I must give this person a response, right? So I'll just forget it for the next 1 week, 2, 3 weeks. But that January 26th, once I open my diary in the morning, I know that, okay, I have to give this person a response because it's due in 2 days. So my own kind of procrastination was more about a just-in-time delivery, right? Anything that was not important, I just pushed it away. So somehow you just get to walk through the maze of passing through your program, having understood that not everything is urgent, right? Some things are urgent, right? If your advisor needs you to get something done, and if it's something that will help you progress in your career or something that will help you finish your program quickly, you can't procrastinate on that, right? But there are other things that can be procrastinated on. So, I mean, it was, by the time I had finished, at least I can say to a large extent, I can tell myself critically, okay, this is what is important, this is what is urgent, this can wait, right? And this, just delegate it to someone else, you know, find someone else to do it, or just say no, right? Say no, you know. If not, you'll be overburdened with the number of things you need to do.
Yeah, and one thing that I also learned too, in addition to a lot about myself in the process, I actually learned that most, if not all, people that go through doctoral programs, we have, and I'm trying to say this in a way that makes a lot of sense, but we have a certain amount of resiliency. The fact that we even have decided that we want to challenge ourselves in a way that what 98% of the population wouldn't even think about doing. And so to me, that really instilled or imbued a great amount of respect for people that even enter the program, whether or not they finish a doctoral program. I really, just the respect that I have for people that have even considered and have entered into a doctoral program. And so when I interact with people, you know, I want to at least acknowledge that. So for all the students on the call, I definitely want to acknowledge that, you know, the fact that you're even here is huge. And so when you start to feel those periods of self-doubt, because you will, and if you don't, then, you know, you're amazing. But I don't know anyone who hasn't, who's in a doctoral program. And the fact that you're even, you know, you've taken the steps, you've put in your application and you're actually in the program is huge. And so, when I first started my career, I felt a lot of the what is the term? Oh my goodness, I can't remember. But basically the term where you feel like you don't belong there, that there are other people better than you, and why are you even interacting with me? Why do you think I deserve this? Well, you do deserve it because you're in the program, you're working towards something, you're enhancing your knowledge base, and that's more than 98% of the population can say. So to that end, anytime I start to feel like, oh, maybe I don't belong in this room, I have to acknowledge to myself that I absolutely do. And I say the same thing for everyone. And even if you're, not attending this, and you might hear about it later, but you're in a doctoral program, you deserve to be there. You have the knowledge. And if you don't feel like you have that knowledge, you will before you finish your program. So don't feel as though you don't belong in those rooms. So, just one thing I want you all to take from this too. Thank you. Imposter syndrome. Thank you for that. Yes. Don't feel that. Everyone feels it. You deserve to be in the rooms in which you're invited to be in.
Yes, I completely agree with that statement, Denise. And with what the other panelists have said so far, for me, the most challenging, or what I learned from this writing experience, was that I'm a very slow writer. And so I'd maybe get in, I don't know, maybe a paragraph or two a day. And if you just do the math, that means you're going to be writing for an awfully long time before you finish that deadline. But what I learned was that I had to be forgiving with myself, and that not every day would I write a magnificent, I don't know, half a page or a page or two. And when you are writing your dissertation, I think that you need to understand that this is a process and it's your process. And whether it's slow or if you're incredibly gifted and can just speed out a dissertation, then kudos to you. But if you're like me and you're a little bit on the slower side, then there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to know, you learn a lot about yourself in this writing process. And the more that you come to terms with who you are, and the more that you're fine with that, then I think that it'll make the writing process a lot more enjoyable.
Thank you. So our next question in the chat is, when did you start looking for a job? During your PhD or after your defense?
I think a lot of this is very specific to the different disciplines. But I signed my contract for my current job before I even defended. And I feel very lucky to have done that. But even before, I was going on interviews the end of the fall semester of my last year. So that means at the beginning of my fall semester of my third and final year, I applied for over 30 jobs, postdoc, faculty positions, research and design, anything that I was even sort of qualified for. And one thing now as a mentor that I tell students is that if you can check a few of the boxes in their required parts of the job, just put your application in. What they're asking for is a wish list. It's basically like our kids, it's their Santa list, right? It's the Barbie dream house in my house, right? My kids want that. They're not going to get all of that, or if they are, they're getting the most amazing person ever. If you think that you can fit whatever they're asking for, put your application in. There's no harm in that at all. But in terms of looking for them, I started looking in August of my last year. And it was an overwhelming full-time job process. I'll be very honest. I didn't handle that very well. I was extremely anxious about it, overwhelmed. And I didn't sleep real well for probably 4 months while I was going through the application process, just because I was so worried about not getting a job right. I put all my eggs in this basket of, going into academia and research and all of that, it was really, really hard. And it kind of wore on me. And then finally I got the job, and I was sleeping better, and things just kind of fell into place. So that process is a whole other, it's like, it's hard. It is not a fun process either. But again, it's something that you kind of have to do. And I don't want to say that you have to struggle through it, but it is a pretty tough struggle looking for jobs and applying, and everyone has different things that they're looking for. And again, I'm very lucky to have gotten the position that I did at the time that I did. But overall, I mean, it's a struggle.
So I work for the federal government, and as you all know, it's a large bureaucracy. And with the government, if you do want to work with the federal government, anticipate 3 to 6 months-ish in terms of from when you apply to when you start working. That includes the application period for HR to review your application, for you to go to the interview, to go through the background check, and all that fun stuff. So if you decide you do want to work for the federal government, I strongly suggest you start applying maybe a year out. And I say a year out because you're going to apply for a lot of jobs before you get an interview. If you don't have actual work experience, if you've only worked as a student, consider within that year time frame doing some volunteer work where you get that level of experience that you're actually looking to work in the federal government. That way you can kind of bulk up your resume to get going into the actual workforce. So long answer longer, I started applying when I was still a doctoral student. And had a position ready for me. I had a position before I graduated, but then a different position with a significant pay bump once I did get my PhD.
Well, I'll just add maybe 1 or 2 things to what Dennis and Jeff have said. I work in academia, so my experiences are closely tied to what Jeff just said. I started applying in September, and Jeff said 30, I did 40. So it was tough, right? But once you've made up your mind, right? I knew I wanted to go into academia, right? So I applied for like 6 postdocs, right? And 34 assistant professor positions, right? And some will click, some will not. Some you will never hear back from them. So some of the applications I put in December last year, right? November this year, some of them are just getting back to me, So yeah, it can be that bad. But one of my mentors taught me very early, you have to develop a very thick skin, right? Rejection does not mean that you yourself are not good enough. No, rejection just means that they are not looking for someone that has your kind of skill set. It's as simple as that, right? It's not that you are not good enough. You will find the perfect fit. That's why you need to apply for as many as possible, right? It's just like, think about it, even the entertainers, right? We are very familiar with the common songs and plays they put out. But go back and read about them. You see a lot of songs they've released that you don't know anything about, right? It's just like that. You have a lot of things out there. Some will hit, some will not hit, right? So whatever hits, your first job is not your final job, right? You just need a job out of the door to pay the bills and take care of yourself. After a few years, if you feel like you want to switch, then you can switch. So but it takes a lot of time to do all the applications. So I was lucky because I had a fellowship my final year, right? So I didn't have to do 20 hours of GA work for anyone, for any of my advisors. So I was able to put in that time into my dissertation and applications. But if you are working full time, it becomes tougher for you, right, to do this, but it takes a lot of time to put in an application. Sometimes you are filling the forms and the applications and you're like, why are they asking me all these stupid questions, right? But if you want to do an application, you have to put in and answer all those questions. So, I mean, you need to set out time, right, to do it. So 1 year out, at the beginning of that session that you want to graduate, you need to start all the applications.
Yes, I completely agree with your panelists. I started looking about a year out of my expected graduation date, knowing that the expected graduation date could always change, so keep that in mind. But I applied to, so I'm a postdoc, so once I see some postdoc questions coming up here in the near future, but I applied for postdocs only, and I agree with Jeff. I think that applying to jobs with the intention of getting into academia may be a little bit discipline specific. So in the microbiology and immunology field, they more often than not require the postdoc before getting into academia, but I've heard exceptions though. But I wanted to broaden my skill sets from what I had done in graduate school, so that's why I went into postdoc before then going into academia. But yes, look as early as you can.
Thank you all. So this next question is specifically for Jeff, and it says, as a fellow kin major currently in my final semester of master's program, did you know what you wanted to use your degree for? Did you want to go into research and professor, or was there something else you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a really hard question to answer. So I was very lucky. I kind of dabbled in a lot of different things while I was doing my master's. So I knew a lot of things that I didn't want to do. I created a list of things that I could potentially do with my degree, and I was able to scratch a lot of them off because they just didn't fit. But then I was very lucky after my master's. I was basically running a research lab all on my own. I was doing the things that I love to do and that I found a passion for it. And I realized that the only way that I could keep doing those things was to go the doctoral route into academia. And I knew that I enjoyed teaching to a certain extent. I'm not a great teacher. I don't love it. Probably shouldn't say that, but I don't love it. It's okay. Manage it. We do what we can. Um, but I kind of had a different route. My best advice at this point is to just try everything, even things that you may not enjoy. At least if you don't like it, you know that you don't like it. If you haven't tried it, you can't cross it off your list of possibilities.
Thank you. So our next question is, it says, in retrospect, and this is if you have gone through the writing bootcamp before, how has the writing bootcamp helped you for your dissertation? Could you give any advice for this cycle of Rebel bootcampers? So I'm not positive if our panel here has been in the Rebel writing bootcamp. John, have you been in it? Oh, I lost you. Can you say something again? Oh, you're just muted, sorry. There you go.
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please? I was in a boot camp in 2018, I think.
Yeah, so it says, how has the Grad Rebel Writing Bootcamp helped you for your dissertation? Could you give any advice for this cycle of Rebel bootcampers?
Sure. So I was in the boot camp in 2018. And really, for me, what the boot camp did for me was I had that 1 week of uninterrupted time. Now, what I did with that time was I was able to finish my late review for my dissertation. I had started it, but I was stumbling through. I was able to finish it, right, during that 1 week of uninterrupted work. And for me, I think I've come to realize over time that that's when I do my best work, right? Like when I wake up in the morning and my calendar is empty, I can choose how many hours I want to dedicate to whatever. But whenever I have to go out and come in and go out and come in, that interruption throws off my reading. So why the Rebel Bootcamp was good? Yes, I had to go out, but when I got into the library, I could stay in the library from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., right? And grad college was gracious enough to provide snacks and all the other stuff. So you didn't have to go anywhere if you didn't want to. So it was really very helpful. So for those that are doing the bootcamp now, what I would say is, as much as possible, this 1 week that you dedicated to doing the bootcamp, pick a project, pick something that you want to complete, right? And try and complete it. Because finding dedicated time in life is usually the most difficult thing, right? Like telling yourself this next 2-3 days, this is the only thing I'm going to do. That is what it takes. That's part of the time management and everything. So I was able to finish my lit review, right, for my dissertation during the boot camp. That's what I did. That was the only thing I set my mind to do. So whenever they were having any of the sessions, especially maybe writing sessions that were not of interest to me, I didn't go, right? I just went for a few of the sessions that were of importance to me, that I knew that I was going to learn something really important, right? But otherwise, I didn't go for any of the sessions. I just sat down somewhere and I was writing all through, right? So that's what I did. So I would advise, have a project, a mini project to complete. It can be a manuscript, right? It can be part of your dissertation. It can be writing the methods, whatever. But if you have something small that you want to finish, it's easier for you to focus on that for 1 week and get it done, you know.
Thank you so much, John. So our next question here is, do I need a postdoc to get into academia?
So I think we already sort of talked about this, and it is very discipline specific. I didn't do a postdoc. As Joy said earlier, you know, in a lot of her work, you need a postdoc. So I would really, my advice, or I guess my answer to that, if you want to call it that, is talk to those who have succeeded and who are in academia. What do you need to do? What is the roadmap that you have to follow? Some people don't. Some people are able to gain skills and they can do what they need to do. Whereas other disciplines say you need to have this extra experience. So to me, it's very, very discipline specific.
Thank you, Jeff. So this might be something that you might want to ask your advisor about, since they're directly in your field and work in that field. So our next question is, how was your relationship with your dissertation advisor? How did you handle any miscommunication with your dissertation committee?
I definitely had I would say, pretty good relationship with all of my dissertation committee members. They were strong advocates for me. They really wanted to see me succeed, and I can tell you that as a student, it really felt empowering knowing that my committee was working with me, as opposed to, you know, begrudgingly working because they have to, you know, with a student. And so for me, it was really important to look at all of the faculty and make a decision after I had gotten to know all of them, as to who would be on my committee and who would be the chair of my committee. Also, one thing you have to consider when it comes to departments, unfortunately, but this is real life, politics. So who gets along with who and how well they work together. Are they going to encourage you to do things to spite one another? Because if that's the case, then you don't want them on your committee together. And I had a very cohesive, very well blended committee. So I'm grateful in that regard, but that was very carefully curated and it was very intentional. So the minute I could form my committee, I didn't quite yet. I gave it some time so I could get to know everyone and kind of observe their relationships from afar before making that final decision on paper.
I think Denise raises something very important. So along with what she said, what I would advise is don't pick your committee yourself, right? So what I did, I had an idea of who I wanted, right? And I thought that they were nice people, but I didn't. So the only person you can pick is your dissertation chair or your advisor. Then ask your advisor, who do you want on this committee? Or tell your advisor, this is the list I have. Who do you want to work with, or who would you not want to work with, right? Whether you like it or not, even within the department, right, there are cliques of people that work better together, right? So my advisor told me, oh, these are the people I want on the committee. And I looked at them. Do they have the skill sets that I need? I knew I needed a biostatistician on my committee because my statistics was not very good. And she said, okay, this is the biostatistician you can pick, right? And like I had absolutely no problem with my committee, right? In the 1.5 years that I did my dissertation, absolutely no problem. Because the only thing I did was, if I needed something, I spoke to my advisor would say, okay, go speak with this person. If she tell her I said you should come speak with her, right? And that's the level of that relationship they had, right? Because they were friends. So because if you approach anyone and your advisor doesn't really click with the person or can't work with the person easily, then you'll be in a fix, right? You don't want to approach someone and say, oh, I no longer want you on my committee. That will be sending a bad message. So I had a list and I approached my advisor. My advisor said, okay, yes, I can work with this person. You can take out this person, replace this person. And when your advisor picks your list, you'll be fine. I really don't. It means because they'll be picking people they know they can always talk to if you hit a snag or you have a challenge down the line.
So I sort of take a different approach to this, and my approach in forming my committee was finding people who could help me do better. Much like Denise said, your committee is there to advocate for you because at that point you're colleagues, right? Like they're going to be on the manuscripts, they're going to be on future grant submissions, whatever it may be. So the way that I approach that now as a faculty mentor is I want people that my students can work with. I feel like I can get along with just about anyone. Whether that's true or not is someone else's decision, I guess. But I want to make sure that the student is comfortable. So if I'm not comfortable with someone, I'm going to advocate for my student, and that is my job. That's my role. So if they come to me with someone that I don't enjoy working with, that's too bad for me. I'm going to have to get over it because my student's success will be my success. They're my legacy. So, I think that it is really dependent upon your relationship with your mentor. If your mentor has the same thoughts that I do, fantastic. If they don't, hey, that's fine. But again, it goes back to communication, right? That's all this whole thing is about, is you just have to have open lines of communication. And at some point they're going to get crossed, and, you can have poor communication every now and then. And as long as you're okay to overcome that, whether that is going and sitting down and hanging out in their office, or having dinner with them, something like that. Well, maybe don't do that right now. But back in my day, you could do that. But just making sure that you have those open lines of communication.
I agree. Make sure that you have open lines of communication with your advisor when you're writing your thesis. And make sure, for me, what was very helpful was I had a meeting with her very early on in my dissertation writing, and we came up with a plan. What is due when? And I was pretty generous with the times because I know that I am a terribly slow writer. Sometimes a couple of sentences a day is good enough. But we came up with a plan, and after we came up with that plan, she asked me to deliver on the first set of writing. And once I could meet that first deadline, then after that, she trusted that I could meet the subsequent deadlines. And then we sent that specific schedule out to my committee and had them look at it and see if they wanted to make any changes or if they wanted to see anything beforehand. because more often than not, your committee is super busy with other committees. And so sometimes deadlines can clash. And thankfully, I didn't have any significant problems. But again, it was because I planned really far in advance and gave them a couple weeks, sometimes a month, depending on the chapter, to review it and return it back to me.
Thank you. So looking back on the writing process and knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently?
I know for myself, I would have been a lot smarter in terms of independent classroom assignments. I would have done more independent classroom assignments related to either the lit review for my dissertation or thesis, or some research component for my dissertation or thesis. I was actually told this before I entered into a doctoral program. I even have it in my notes, oh, here's everything I need to do. Here's my checklist. And I completely ignored the checklist and went my own way. I didn't take too long, I don't believe, in terms of my program. However, I could have been a lot faster, because when you do certain assignments in class, especially independent projects, your professor will review what you submit. They will provide their comments. They will provide you with feedback. In some cases, in sociology, they'll even provide you with other research sources to examine pertaining to your topics. And so that's a lot of intellectual capital that I could have utilized in the process that I kind of let go to waste. But I got a little wiser as I was older, a little bit later in the program, but I could have definitely started from the beginning doing that. But I certainly don't have any regrets, but I would have done that for sure.
I think looking back, you can always do better with time. Whatever you do, that getting better organized with deadlines and timelines and building in strategies to reduce the amount of stress. I don't know how it's going to be done, but looking back, I think I may not have been as stressed as I was, right? Especially this time last year. Around this time last year, I was finishing the final chapters of my dissertation, and somehow the results and the discussion parts were not clicking, right? So it was torture. You write, rewrite, write, rewrite, write, rewrite. So somehow I think if there is a better way to do that, I don't know yet, but for me, that was really the toughest part of my PhD, right? That making sure that all my results and my discussion, they were in tandem. So that part is really where that's the only part I know that gave me significant problem, right? So if anyone has any suggestion on how to go about that, I don't know. But really looking back, that's really because my winter break this time last year was really not very good. I worked all through my winter break and it was really, really very stressful. Couldn't sleep, had to work all through. So, I mean, just strategies to reduce the amount of stress that we are going through as we write and as we finish. So, really, that's one thing I would want to change if I were to do all this again, but I don't know how to do it yet.
So from my perspective, I didn't do the traditional dissertation, so I don't know that I was under the same amount of stress as like what John was just talking about. But I think what I probably would have done, looking back to my master's thesis, I probably would have spent more time reading other theses, understanding how someone else does it, because a thesis and a dissertation is very different from a manuscript, right? They're right, the thesis dissertation is redundant. There's a lot of things in there that you're writing to show your breadth of knowledge, whereas in a manuscript, it's one sentence, not 12 pages. So I wish that I would have done that. And I didn't realize that I could do that because I was, I think the best way to say it is I was naive. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I would have gone to the library and actually pulled those theses off the shelf and read them and saw how people were saying them, because that would have helped me sort of flip the switch in terms of what I need to do. I mean, because writing is what it is, right? It's putting words on paper. Whether they're good words, that's up for debate. But yeah, just going back and kind of learning how to do the process. I kind of did it on my own. And we already know my track record for a master's thesis was not great. So kind of revisiting that would have been my kind of reflective moment.
So my dissertation, what I wish I had done, so I had to spend quite a lot of time on the bench, between the lab bench and writing at the same time. And that's hard. I wish that I had, for the most part, I had completed all the experiments that I needed to do before I started writing. But then the pandemic hit, and of course, that just blew a hole up in all those plans. And so a lot of the actual experiments that I wanted to get done before I wrote out my dissertation, before I wrote up the manuscripts, hadn't quite gotten done. So I wish that I had prioritized some of my lab work, and try to get a little bit more of that done before I started writing. But of course, it's hard to predict something like that happening. And another thing that I looking back at it now, so the dissertation for me, how it was set up is that there were 5 or 6 chapters, and each chapter could be a manuscript in and of itself. If I had known this early on in my graduate degree, then I would have really focused on writing manuscripts early in my degree so that I could just slot those manuscripts in and then boom, chapter done. I didn't find that out until later stage, but use that knowledge for your own gain. And that's my advice.
All right, our next question is, how did preparing for your comprehensive exams feed into writing your dissertation? Did you take notes, annotate your readings, etc.?
I feel like I'm going to be the odd one out here, and my comprehensive exam was very different from my dissertation. Basically, I had to, for my comprehensive exam and oral defense for it, I had to write an NIH modified R03 grant and defend that. And it did not have to be aligned with my dissertation work. So in doing that, basically what it did is it took time away from my dissertation. And what I focused on at that point was more methodology. And what new tools could I gain in writing this fictitious grant? Could I apply to my dissertation? Is there a different way that I can analyze the data? Is there a different statistical model? Or are there these new cool tools that maybe I haven't really thought of because it doesn't really fit? So yeah, I mean, it was a very different approach than what some of the other panelists might have, simply because the two almost weren't connected. So I'm actually interested to see what the other panelists have to say as well.
So in the Department of Sociology, we had dissertation binders that we were all encouraged to create. I'm sorry, not dissertation binders, comprehensive exam binders. And so I had 2 really thick binders that were about this wide each. And I annotated, I basically wrote like essentially and a mini essay per each article that I wrote. And I incorporated that into the comprehensive exam binder. And that absolutely, I did utilize that for my dissertation because I already had summaries for my lit reviews. And the way and so when the other panelists were speaking earlier about organization and challenges with that and time management, I actually got a lot more organized. And I will say this proudly, as a woman who has ADHD, getting way more organized, I was super impressed with myself. But basically, I utilized each of the specific topics that I was including into my dissertation, and I color coded each of the individual topics. So whenever I turned to whatever page in the comp binder, I would actually be able to say, okay, so this is in the section about sociology and work. This is the section about economics and work, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that really made the process a lot easier and a lot faster when it came to writing my dissertation, because going through comps, that was traumatic enough. But getting to the writing part, that was the fun part, because I had already organized everything so efficiently that it made it easy just to sit, reference it, and move right along in terms of writing the lit review.
So in my department, it's funny enough, it's a mixture of what Jeff and Dennis just said. So in my department, the comps is actually two steps, right? So you have a part where you actually sit for like an essay exam, right? So you have this series of questions they give you and you write it out. Then the second part is where you actually go and defend chapter 1 to 3 of your dissertation, right? You defend your methodology, your lit review, your methodology, and tell them what you want to do, and they critique you and give you feedback. That is, so those two put together. So doing the lit review for before the comms was, I didn't have a binder, but what I did was for every article I wrote out a paragraph summarizing it. So I had it all in a Word document, right? On my cloud, on my computer, on every device I could find, so I could always have it. So that's what I did from my own part to get organized and prepare. So wherever they gave me feedback, right, either from the statistical methods or any of the other things I was planning to do, I'll just go there and slot in those comments. So I could say, okay, this is what I've read, or this is what I've put together for talking about methodology or analysis or data collection, so that's how I did mine, but it was a totally different approach from the other departments.
Yeah, so in the Department of Biology, specifically microbiology, at UNLV, we had to take two different comprehensive exams, and the first one, similar to some of the other panelists, was not on my dissertation at all. It was as far removed as possible. For instance, I work with a bacterial pathogen, and some of the comps questions were related to DNA physics. So, I mean, it was out there. But what I took from it was it broadened my perspective. And I think honestly, it helped me become a better scientist overall. And the whole purpose of it wasn't so much to focus necessarily on the topics, but was to learn how to think critically and write critically, and then use those skills and put them into writing your dissertation after the fact. That's what helped the most, and that's what I took the most from those two. And also thinking broadly, so trying to think outside of my specific little niche of science. For the second dissertation, or for the second comprehensive exams that we had, though, we did have to write an NIH R21 style grant and then defend that. So that was directly tied to my project, and I was able to take some of that and put it into my dissertation. but we were warned that we could only use that for one chapter. So definitely talk with your committee beforehand. Sometimes they don't particularly care for double dipping too much. But for me, comprehensive exams was important because, like the other panelists, I learned how to organize and think critically about everything that I had just read. And so I primarily use Mendeley and EndNotes as my citation managers, and I would make little tiny subfolders and put all of the papers into those subfolders and then label them as in the name of the actual manuscript itself based off of whatever its most significant finding was. And that wasn't always necessarily the title. I could keep going, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time for our panel. But before we wrap up today, I just wanted to thank all our panelists so much for sharing your time with us today and providing us with such helpful advice and really great tips. And thank you for all the participants for joining us today during this workshop. Just as a reminder, we're going to post it on the Grad College YouTube channel later, so you can go back and take any notes. But I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you.